welcome back. Do you ever feel just completely overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the world? Like you're constantly fighting these huge, abstract problems you can't possibly solve? Well, today, we're going to dive into a really powerful mental framework that suggests we might be fighting the wrong war altogether.
So let me ask you this. Think about it right now. When you're feeling stressed, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it the economy? Is it politics? Some big scary thing in the future? We tend to think our stress comes from these massive external forces. But what if the real reason you're so exhausted is something much, much smaller? Something way closer. And honestly, something you can actually fix.
And that gets us to our first big idea, figuring out where our stress really comes from. You know, we're all kind of trained to look outward, to worry about the big picture stuff. But while we're doing that, we completely ignore the immediate, nagging discomforts that are quietly draining our energy second by second. So check this out. It's a fascinating disconnect, right? If you ask someone, hey, what's your problem right now? A lot of us might say something like, the economy. But if you actually pause and check in with your body, in this very moment, the real problem might just be that your chair is uncomfortable. We're stressing about these giant mountains on the horizon, but we don't even notice the little pebble digging into our foot right now.
And man, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? Often attributed to the great Muhammad Ali, it gets right to the heart of the matter. It's not the epic, once-in-a-lifetime struggles that wear us out. It's the small, annoying, persistent things we refuse to deal with. So how do we start dealing with these pebbles? Well, it all begins with a pretty fundamental shift in how we think.
So that leads us to this incredibly powerful concept, non-judgment. This idea comes from ancient wisdom traditions like Zen and Stoicism, and it's really the key that unlocks our ability to take action. It's all about changing how we see the events in our lives in the first place. Just take a look at the difference here. Judgment totally traps us. We slap a label on something, a difficult project, a tough conversation, and call it bad. And what's our first instinct? To avoid it, right? To run away. But acceptance sets us free. Now, it doesn't mean you like what's happening. It just means you acknowledge that it's real. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You ask, okay, this is happening. What can I do with it? That tiny shift from reaction to response, that's where all your power is. I love this analogy for understanding what neutrality really means. A knife itself isn't good or bad. It has no morality. It's just a tool. What makes the difference is the intention of the person holding it. And it's the exact same for the events in our lives. A challenge isn't inherently bad. It's just a tool. What matters is the intention we bring to it, the purpose we decide to give it. This really brings it home. Life is like a tree, right? It's got beautiful, flowering branches, and it's got gnarled, broken ones. If we only accept the parts we like, we can't experience the whole thing. Real strength, real vitality comes from embracing all of it. The easy stuff and the hard stuff, the joy and the pain. And that brings us to how we actually engage with this reality. All right, let's switch gears and talk about focus, because I think most of us have the completely wrong idea about what it even is. We think of focus as this sort of superpower, this ability to have unbreakable concentration for hours. And then, when we can't do it, we feel like a failure. But what if that whole definition is just wrong? So, try this definition on for size. Focus isn't about never getting distracted. It's about having a stable center, a core mission, a single task that you can always come back to after you get distracted. The real skill isn't in preventing your mind from wandering. The skill is in the practice of gently calling it back over and over again. And you know, this whole idea of a center isn't just for when you're working. It applies to your entire life. Think about it. Do you have a work you, a home you, a you for your friends? Are you constantly jumping between different identities, different pots? This flower analogy is just so perfect. A plant can't grow strong roots if it's being replanted all day, and neither can we. Real focus comes from living one integrated life, guided by a single, stable center. So how do you actually build this muscle? It's a super simple 3-step habit. First, you just have to accept that your mind is going to wander. That's what minds do. The goal isn't to fight it. Second, when you notice you've drifted off, don't get mad. This is the most important part. Just notice it like you're watching a cloud pass by. And third, just gently guide your attention back. Every single time you do this, you're doing one more rep, and that callback muscle gets a little bit stronger. You know, in this constant hustle to be more focused and more productive, we've completely forgotten something that's just as important: how to actually rest. We think of rest as just not working. but it's an active skill. It's an art that most of us need to relearn from scratch.
This is so cool. If you look at the etymology, the Turkish word for rest, dinlame, actually comes from the word tin, which means spirit. So rest isn't just about letting your body go limp on the couch, it's an active process of reconnecting with your own spirit. It's a journey inward.
And this is a huge distinction that I think almost all of us get wrong. If you've spent all day doing hard physical labor, then yeah, a good night's sleep is probably exactly what you need. But for most of us, our minds are exhausted, not our bodies. And if your mind is tired, just lying down isn't going to fix it. Your mind will just keep spinning its wheels, even if your body is still.
So what's the answer? It's practicing what you might call mental hygiene. I mean, think about it. We're careful about what food we put in our bodies, right? We need to be just as intentional about what we feed our minds and our emotions. Are you doom-scrolling anxiety and outrage right before you try to sleep? Or are you preparing for sleep like it's a sacred journey, giving your mind the time and space it needs to wind down? This isn't a luxury, it's essential.
All right, let's get real for a second and talk about something we all struggle with: procrastination. We usually beat ourselves up about it, right? We call ourselves lazy or undisciplined, but what if procrastination isn't a character flaw at all? What if it's actually a signal?
This quote comes from a story that's just, wow, it's so revealing. It's about a man who was totally burned out from his corporate job, and he was convinced his big dream was to go start a farm. But after he actually tried it for a few weeks, he had this huge epiphany. His desire wasn't really for the farm, it was a desperate attempt to get away from his current life. He wasn't moving towards something he loved, he was running away from something he hated. And that right there is the whole secret. Procrastination is a reaction. It's your subconscious mind staging a rebellion. You're not actually avoiding the work itself. You're trying to escape the negative feeling you've attached to that work. Maybe it's boredom, maybe it's fear of failure, maybe it's just resentment. Procrastination is a symptom that something is deeply misaligned in your life. Your gut is trying to tell you something's wrong.
Okay, so we've talked about stress, non-judgment, focus, rest, procrastination. What does it all boil down to? It all comes back to this one single unifying idea: living from your center. This is where all the pieces of the puzzle click together into a whole new way of being.
So what do you actually do? The big trick here is to stop worrying about finishing and just focus on starting. The very idea of finishing some huge monumental project can be totally paralyzing. But starting, anyone can start. The victory isn't in the final outcome, because honestly, that's often out of our control. The victory is in the effort itself. You are responsible for the journey, not the destination. And this is the ultimate challenge, right? The final invitation: to be the king of yourself. What does that mean? It means you take radical, total ownership of your inner world. You are the sovereign ruler. You set the laws, you make the choices, you are responsible for your own kingdom. Are you going to be a slave to every distraction and impulse, or are you going to be the one in charge?
And that leaves us with this one last powerful question to think about. When you start to see your life not as something that just happens to you, but as something you are actively building, brick by brick, action by action, this question becomes your ultimate compass. Are the choices you're making today creating a life that you would gladly and joyfully choose to live all over again? Something to think about.